Hello, my name is Jack Yu, and today we will be looking at the physics behind a centrifuge. In this lesson, we will look at how a centrifuge allows for easy extraction of suspended particles. Now, what I mean by this is that you have a certain solid that's actually been dissolved in a certain liquid and cannot be separated except for a centrifuge or evaporation. Now, say we want to quickly do it, then we would opt out for centrifuging it to split the solids from the liquids. Now, before we go into actually how the centrifuge works and the physics behind it, there are a few facts and stipulations we must look at before we continue. First, the tube we are centrifuging contains micelles suspended in a solution of PBS, which is basically salt water, to prevent the cells from dying. And these cells are homogenized into this liquid and thus are not cannot be split apart of solid from liquid. 2. We are assuming that the speed of the tube being centrifuged is equal to the RPM or rates per minute displayed on the centrifuge. That is, we are neglecting any slight change in speed that might result. And finally, centrifuges come in all sizes, and in our case, we are using a smaller laboratory-oriented centrifuge. I hope you enjoy this demonstration, and thank you for watching. So what exactly is a centrifuge? Well, it is a machine that uses the concept of centripetal, not centrifugal force, or force that is directed always towards some constant center, to forcibly pull down and separate solid particles from liquid particles. And in this case, we can then extract the liquid and leave behind only the solid. Now, the following clip shows the centrifuge we will be working with. And following that, we will look at how centripetal force works. Now, what you just saw were the two tubes that we'll be using in the centrifuge. Now, the first one was rather clear because it was just water. This was just to balance out the centrifuge. Now, the second tube was a little more clear, fuzzier, and more translucent than clear. And that was the solution with the suspended cells. So how can we apply centripetal force in the centrifuge to separate the solid from the liquid? Well, by the government of Newton's first law of inertia, any object in motion tends to stay in motion and also travels in a linear fashion. Now, since a centrifuge does not, by definition, put an object in linear motion, rather rotational motion, there must be some outside force that will be exerted in order to create this circular motion. Thus, when an object is directed in a curved path, some outside force or acceleration must have been applied in order to allow the object to deviate from its never-ending linear path, or, as we know it, centripetal force. As shown by the image to your left, in uniform circular motion, which is what occurs in the centrifuge because the spinners and rotators are at a specific distance apart at all times, the centripetal force points toward the center of the orbit. The mass of the object and radius of the orbit will also affect the centripetal force. As we know, the heavier the object is, the easier it would be to draw downwards. So why is it more favorable for us to use a centrifuge in order to separate the solids from the liquids than just applying a normal old force? Well, the main reason why is that at high speeds, the centrifuge can efficiently generate a massive force without taking up too much lab space in order to separate the solids from the liquids. Now, even more specifically, how the centrifuge would separate it is that the more dense particles would move outward in a radial direction and thus accumulate more at the bottom, whereas the lesser dense solutions or particles would congregate more in the middle and thus be above surface more than the denser objects. And as a result, there would be a separation between and a clear layer of these different particles at different densities. Now let's take a look at the centrifuge in action. As seen in the previous picture, using the cell pellet that has been accumulated on the bottom, we can use it for various experimentations pertaining just to the cells. Now, in the same way, we can apply the principles of centripetal force to help better our society. And so, in summation, there are three key concepts needed to be taken from our lesson. That first, many fields outside of physics, including biology, utilize the concept of centripetal force. By considering the capabilities of rotating an object at high speed, we can devise great inventions and methods for our advantage. Second, since velocity is squared, centripetal force can become a very potent force if an object is in uniform circular motion at high speeds. This is why we use the revolutions per minute of 1800s for the centrifuge, and no less. This force was needed for the pellet to accumulate, and as such, the velocity was needed for the pellet to accumulate. And finally, the centripetal force is extremely important when considering Newton's laws, for without it, we would have neither banked curves to assist us in turning when driving, nor rotational motion to keep our planets from orbiting out of the solar system in a linear fashion. Thus, it's highly important that we understand the concept of centripetal force and utilize it to our advantage to better society in the future. I thank you for this lesson and hope that you understand and grasp the importance of centripetal force.